I am here with Abby, and we are going to be talking about recognition and pretty much how the expectations of employees, expectations are always going to be changing, but we've done some great research along with our parent company, Zealous, and we have more data now that really shows just how much employee expectations have changed, especially in the last couple of years. And we want to talk about what you can do when it comes to recognition to try and actually bridge that gap between the two. So I'm Lauren Goldgrove. I am the General Manager of OneHub Recognition, and I am joined today by Abby. Abby, would you like to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So hi guys, I'm Abby Russell. I'm one of the senior customer success managers for recognition specifically at Benefex. And I look after lots of our customers, just make sure everyone's successful, happy, and keep the wheels turning.
Wheels turning, and I try and keep the trains on the track. For more metaphors, we would be remiss not to mention that today is indeed Star Wars Day. Abby, I see you are wearing your requisite Star Wars, let's call it regalia, why not? Did you have a joke about Star Wars?
Yeah, but it's going to make me like cringe a little bit, so I'm going to save it for the right slide.
Okay. We will be waiting with a bated breath for Abby's wonderful Star Wars dad joke, which I'm assuming is a dad joke. I think I'm gonna laugh. Whatever it is you're going to say, I'm sure that I will laugh. But moving back to recognition, why is it important that we are doing this now? Why is it important that we did the research, and why do we want to talk about it? And a lot of this stuff is going to be kind of, not a surprise, but nevertheless, we have to set the scene and look at the facts. And the facts are that face-to-face recognition is no longer effortless, if it is even happening at all. And that goes for all kinds of recognition, because when we were all in offices all day, every day, we would be interacting and bumping up against people in different departments. And if we had heard that someone in the finance department had done something wonderful and you run into them in the kitchen, you are definitely more likely to be, to say to that person, hey, I heard about this thing, good job on that. That's not happening anymore. So those more distant relations are not bumping into one another. And you also don't even have the same frequency of recognitions being given even within teams. And so a new normal has now been established, 2+ years from the pandemic, and yet what we see is that the recognition schemes of our new customers that are coming on board with us, they're still processing that new normal, and they are indeed playing catch up. As well, employees have always, historically, for as long as there has been a working world, looked to leaders for praise. And so in this new world of work, we know that that is more important than ever, because the recognition, say the volume, as well as the intensity of those recognitions that an individual employee would be getting on a day-to-day basis, because of what I said at the top, you're not having those more periphery relationships giving recognition to one another. Having someone in a senior position call out the amazing work that is being done within an organization, it does enormous things to bolster employees. And we see the data in that every day within our platform. And then, as I've said, in short, companies by and large aren't really meeting the expectations of employees. And we know that part of the big picture is a focus on well-being. We know that part of that tapestry has to do with the relationships that employees have with line managers, We know that another lever in all of this is psychological safety, especially in times of change. And yes, we do still have a new normal, but if we haven't caught up, then things are still changing for the individual employee. And then also part of this picture, we have candidates, new hires, and there's so much data on that as well. And you know, our marketing team did some phenomenal work earlier in the year that I think Abby is going to touch on a little bit later on, when we just talk about how much movement there is within the workforce right now. And I'm sure that to all of you who are here today, that is no surprise. We are currently living in an employees market, not an employer's market. And candidates factor in recognition in their decision making. So we'll be going into a little bit more detail about all of this, but in terms of setting the scene, this is what we're all working with as it stands right now.
So as Lauren set the scene for me, thank you. We've seen a massive difference from where we are now to where we were prior the pandemic even being considered. And one part of the research that we explored was we found that there was a significant need for employees to appreciate quality time as like their first choice if they were to decide how they were recognised, how they were appreciated within the workforce, and then followed by words of affirmation. So when you're prior pandemic, quality time was a really easy thing to be able to navigate around. You sat near your managers or you sat around your team members. So it was easy to grab a quick 5 minutes or to have a quick chat to them whilst you're waiting for the kettle to boil, all of those sorts of natural interactions that you have. When you now are in a place where that quality time is so much more restricted based on the job role that you have, I imagine most people are affected by that. It then puts into question that words of affirmation becomes way more important because you now don't have the option to offer that quality time in the same way as you had before, in a natural way that you did before. So then you have to lean on that even more. And then that's something that you have a little bit more control over. And with having words of affirmation, maybe it's as your focus for how you appreciate your colleagues and how managers appreciate their teams, you then are able to engage your workforce and your teams accordingly because you have that sort of focus. And that's something that even coming out of that pandemic is always going to be a really quality factor. People still want quality time, but as that's more restrictive and probably will remain that way for probably the foreseeable, words of affirmation needs to almost be the highlight now in lieu of that whilst we're waiting for that change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in a galaxy far, far away, before COVID was actually a thing, we found that only 6% of people primarily worked at home. There were systems that didn't have the capacity to even work at home. It'd never been considered. And then we moved to after COVID, everyone's been sent home. They've worked out how to work from home. Everyone's got that sort of flexibility around it. And we're seeing even more now that people are either not going into the office at all, or they have the option to be flexible and choose whether they go in or they don't go in, which is great because you'll have the flexibility and you have that empowerment for colleagues to choose how they work, which is great. But we're seeing more and more that bigger employees especially don't have any plan to return to the office full time. So to cater for the people that are happy to go into the office, people that want to be at home, you now have to work out how we recognise those people everywhere, regardless of where they're working. So if you're all working from home, then we have to work out how the best way is to appreciate and recognise those people, as well as the people that are making a bit of a hybrid approach to their work life.
So some statistics. We see that 88% want to be able to recognize their colleagues for their efforts and their successes. And the key thing for me with this slide is that it is not just I guess what I love about the statistic is this is about people wanting to recognize others. This isn't actually to do with, I need more recognition. And I would say that a lot of people, they wouldn't complain if they got more. But the fact is, this is an astounding statistic that the vast majority of employees want to be able to recognize their colleagues. So my question for you, Abby, is have you seen a change in the ways that employees are giving recognitions to one another as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. So with a lot of people moving home and not having to be in the office, people had to become a little bit more creative with how they pushed giving recognition because of the lack of face-to-face that naturally you say thank you as you're passing or that sort of thing. And what helps with recognition is we have a mobile app. That means if you are not a worker that is necessarily desk-based and you're someone that works on the go, or you work in a van and that's your job, you're an engineer somewhere, that the mobile app became such a strong element, such a needed thing for so many people, especially launching during lockdown, because it meant that they weren't segregated from the people that were easier to access because they have their computer, they have emails launched with them. But it meant that we could focus on everybody. Nobody was different. Everybody had access to it, regardless of whether they were desk-based or not. And that was really essential, especially with people like key workers who were still going to work, that possibly needed the uplift more because they were doing such high pressured jobs at that point, that this was a really good way of including all of those people. And in the lack of presence of face-to-face recognition, you still are able to give that recognition on the go, as well as also receiving it.
Yeah, it's so critical, and it weirdly feels like forever and also just a day ago when we're talking about key workers and the pressure that was put on them. And you did have this huge dichotomy between people who are, at home and possibly going an entire week without seeing anyone else. And I know that we had that even in with Benefex, that there are people that were living on their own and whatnot. And so being able to reach everyone wherever they were was just so critical. So talk to me a little bit more about this whole idea of giving recognition to colleagues, because I feel like we have a couple examples, and obviously we're not going to name any names, but we have a couple examples within our customer base where they came from a system that was quite a bit more restricted. If they had a recognition scheme in place at all, we know that there are quite a few who, I believe it was managers only, if that. So talk about how we've been able to bring and move along those customers to then actually meet the expectations of existing employees.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a couple of customers that have had previous recognition systems or schemes maybe that they've got in place that have only been accessible to a select group. So whether that's managers or senior leaders, for example, which is great in the sense that you want that management recognition because it lifts your team up, it boosts morale, it's really good, and it resonates really well with people. But what it does mean is that you don't empower all of your colleagues then to do the same thing and recognise and say thank you and acknowledge people for unreal work that they're doing. So by focusing on social recognition for everybody that encompasses everybody, whether they are full-time, senior, contractors, even anybody that sits under your company's umbrella, being able to allow them to provide recognition was something that was really important and will be, because you want to be recognised whenever you do a really good job, really. Every time you do a good thing, you'd like someone to say thank you for it. And by allowing that to be open to all of your peers, you are going to get that recognition more often, because your managers aren't going to see every little thing that makes the cogs turn throughout the day. your peers are probably going to catch up on that, and they're going to see the little things that you do to help their day a little bit, or the little time you give them to lend a hand on something that's making them stressed or is really difficult for them to do.
For sure. And the proof really is in the pudding for me. And I did we obviously have, loads of data. All of it's anonymous, of course, but we have loads of data where we can look at the impact of recognitions given across all of our customer base. The way in which we measure that is called emotional resonance, and it is a score where every single person who is given a recognition is given the opportunity to then give some feedback that also is anonymous, and it says, how did this recognition make me feel? And they basically rate it on a scale, and then they can also attach certain words. I felt uplifted, I felt jovial, I felt really excited. There's a number of loads that they can choose from. So I did a poll of that data at the start of, wow, it is only Wednesday, but it was the start of the week yesterday. So I wanted to get the most up-to-date data possible. So I did a poll, and I looked at the difference in emotional resonance scores between recognitions that are given kind of in any direction across the organization. So frequently that is referred to as peer-to-peer. And I compared that with recognitions that were given by a manager to their, by a line manager to their direct report. And the data indeed is very similar to the last time I polled it, but the only difference was 0.2%. And so statistically speaking, we actually don't see a significant difference in the impact emotionally that employees have when they are given a recognition. Yes, it is ever so slightly higher when that recognition is given by a line manager, but overall, we are not talking about a significant difference. So why limit a scheme to something that only goes in one direction when it can be going in all? And when we know, based on the data that we are measuring, based on the feedback that is coming direct from the employees, and they're saying, all of it makes me feel great. all of this really makes my day. Let's talk a little bit about our next statistic. So we have 89% believe that people should be recognized for embodying the values of the company. So I talk about this a lot, and if you have heard me talk about this before, I do apologize, but I will continue saying it until I'm blue in the face or the cows come home or whatever idiom you would like to choose. But values don't come to life unless you are seeing them actively be used with examples. In marketing and communications, there's that wonderful phrase of show, don't tell. And I feel like that completely applies here, where if you just had something, your values, on a web page or as a wall decal in your office, I wouldn't say don't do that, but that's not where they're going to come to life for employees. So talk to me, Abby, about some examples with customers who were able to implement recognition. And as we know, apologies if you don't know, but all recognitions given through OneHub Recognition are tied to a value of your organization. You can't do it without. So everyone has to choose a value and then give a recognition to that person based against that value. So do you have any examples of customers who used recognition, implemented recognition, and then got some really interesting feedback that actually became a learning opportunity when it came to specifically their company values?
Yeah, a really interesting one we've had is that in pulling down their report to see which values were selected, which ones were being most popularly used, they had exactly what they expected in terms of usage for the most popular couple, which tends to be the same across most companies. But they had one that was never really being selected. I think it had been selected a handful of times, but very disproportionate to how the other values had been selected. And when we were going through their monthly briefing, we were trying to work out why maybe that was the case. And through some of the feedback that they got after launch, they realized that people didn't actually understand the value. So even though they'd had the opportunity to add some wording to give a little bit of guidance on the value, people just didn't know how to use it, or they didn't know how to apply it, or how it really worked, so that when they were going to post a recognition, it might have been actually that the recognition they were posting was perfect for that value, but because it wasn't clear, they didn't understand how to apply it, it was never used. So as part of that feedback, they've made a change to it. They changed the name a bit, they made the description a little bit more simple, and it gets selected all the time now. And it's one that I think sits third or fourth in their list, because people just have a better understanding of how that comes to life and how that looks when people are able to highlight that as a value with the recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about any companies, customers of ours, who have been able to record improvements in their KPIs because of specifically recognition and how it links to values?
Yeah, a really good one for this one, actually. So quite often we'll get customers that have a pre-existing way in which they collect like employee engagement data, whether that's through surveys or however else they do it. And quite often it will tell you things like people feel like they're lacking in recognition, so they look in to get recognition, so that sort of thing. And we had one customer who has a value around the vein of we care, something really similar to that. And what they saw was about 6 months after they went live, they noticed that in the engagement surveys, they started getting an uptake and an increase in the phrases like, I feel like my manager cares about me. I feel like the business care about how I'm doing. They're concerned about my welfare, that sort of thing. And it became something that you could see was people were feeling more supported at work. And this value was being used more than any of the other ones were. So it was a really nice correlation to see, actually, by allowing these values to be enveloped within the recognition scheme, we were literally bringing them to life and allowing people to feel it, and then also for the company to see that actually playing out in their engagement surveys that they took afterwards. And that's something they still see now. They're still getting that increase in the feeling of support and care from not only their peers, but their managers and the company as a whole.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, what we've been able to kind of tie in together is meeting this particular expectation that people should be recognized for embodying the values of that company. So as long as the values are clear and they have a good sense of what that actually looks like, and then can recognize one another for it, you're meeting this expectation of employees. Let's look at, did it go? There we go. Let's look at another statistic. So 86% expect their employer to have recognition technology in place. Now, before I hand this over to Abby, I'm going to get up on my little soapbox for a moment and kind of talk about my own gripe with tick box exercises. I have helped support a number of implementations from a consulting and expertise standpoint, and with my background in psychology and all of that good stuff. And I have to say that I have started out these conversations and seen quite a few times that while everyone has really good intentions, and especially when it's the key stakeholders that Abby and I deal with all the time, who are the ones that are spearheading a recognition scheme being put into place in an organization, you do learn, you can get a sense really quickly based on how those individuals are talking, that recognition is something they've pushed along, but maybe they don't have 100% buy-in. That someone in the board heard that this is something that you have to do to meet employee expectations. And so now we just need to do it. And again, there's obviously no malicious intent in doing it that way, but I am the first person to kind of go, okay, hold on. We need to have a little bit of a timeout in this meeting, because what we want to do is help create meaningful change in an organization to reach the goals and objectives that were set forth, and therefore the reason why these stakeholders are pushing forward a new recognition scheme. And I think that it is so important to have a fully fleshed out implementation program and update kind of to reflect the expectation of the changes that we want to make. And part of this kind of bigger picture has to do with what I said at the top of the hour, which was, we know that expectations for new hires and potential hires comes down to a number of factors, but culture, that has been a core factor for candidates in their decision making for a very long time. And it is, and I feel like we have that, there was, before culture was even a word that was uttered in the workplace, and then there was an after. And I really don't think that there's ever going to be a going back. And in some of the data we've already seen, we know that employees want their values reflected in the businesses that they work for, and they want to be working in healthy workplaces and healthy cultures. How many of us have gone out for drinks with friends who work at various different organizations and heard stories about toxic bosses or toxic workplaces? I would wager that it is literally all of us. I don't think there is a single one of us who has been able to have a career and avoid, if you've managed to avoid it yourself, I mean, that is incredible. And I hope that we can one day get to that point, because it just makes everything easier, and it makes everyone happier, and we know the benefits, but we're not there yet. And so recognition is absolutely correlated to the health of a company's culture, because it is a lever that can be pulled to create cultures of gratitude. And we know there's so much research that has been done on this in an organizational psychology kind of framework. We know that gratitude and cultures of gratitude are absolutely fundamental for healthy workplaces. So with all that being said about me saying it cannot be a tick box exercise, I do want to show you a few items that I think should be a part of your decision making, because it deals directly to this idea of an employer having a recognition scheme and technology in place. No one expects for employees and potential candidates, it is not good enough to just have the technology. If the technology doesn't work, if it is clunky, if it just has loads of barriers to entry, no one's going to use it. And in some circumstances, that's actually worse for employees, because there's something that they can't use, they get aggravated with, and they're like, okay, you know what, forget it, I won't even try. So the technology itself also has to meet the expectations of employees and of potential candidates. So I think we'll be sharing the slides after, I believe, and if not, I'm happy to at least share this slide with everyone so that you can reference it, because I think no matter who you work with from a recognition standpoint, I just truly believe it has to meet these expectations for the technology to really flourish in the organization. So I'll run through this super quickly. Is it motivational? Is it actually getting employees to do more of the behaviors that you want and less of the ones that you don't? Was the UX itself designed based on principles of psychology and habit building? Because at the end of the day, we want critical mass. We only get that if there are low barrier to entry, there's low friction, and it becomes sticky, right? It's something that is exciting for employees to use. Does it foster well-being and emotional resilience because of the connections that it helps build, especially in what we talked about in the wake of, this new working world and everyone being in relatively still isolated, places, right? We're looking at the same four walls and not much else during the day. So how do you build and foster that connection and create emotional resilience so that when there are bumps in the road, teams are healthier as a whole? The system itself really needs to support recognitions that are given immediately, because we know that there is, the longer the delay between the behavior that is being recognized and when the recognition is given, we know that the emotional resonance of that is lower. That the sooner you can give the recognition, the better, when it comes to having that positive emotional impact on employees. And then it should be everything else that you see here: personal, authentic. It should be easy to be done frequently. And my favorite of this is certainly enjoyable and not obligational. It has to feel like social media. It has to feel like the thing that many of us, even though we know that we should, if we need to take a break in the workday, we should probably go outside, touch some grass, get some sunshine on our face. But a lot of the times, if we need a little bit of a 5-minute mental health break, we pick up our phones and we reach for social media. So how much more impactful is the technology if it feels like social media versus HR technology? And that's not to say, obviously, we are an HR tech company. Of course, there are going to be pieces of that larger technology puzzle that is obligational, right? There's no way around that. But recognition specifically, it cannot feel obligational. It has to be sticky and easy and make people want to actually use it for it to work. You also really need to look at, is it supporting people managers? And I have gone into this many times before, and I will not, bore everyone about this today, just because I do want to be careful of how we're doing for time. But people managers are often the ones that actually get lost within an organization because they are being squeezed from both directions. They're being squeezed from pressures at the top of the organization, and they are being squeezed from the responsibilities of managing teams. And so if it's ignoring them, that's going to be a problem, because managers are the secret sauce to recognition. So if you're not supporting them and they're not using it, then I would fully argue that critical mass cannot be attained. And then, of course, we get down to some of the measurements, and is it having the impact that you want, and does it scale with your business? So now that I have said, don't make it a tick box exercise, but include these, we'll go back to the statistic in question of 86% wanting and expecting that recognition technology to be in place. So Abby, any thoughts on everything that I have just talked about?
I was wondering how long it would take you to say managers are the secret sauce, and it's like 12 slides.
Oh, that'll be my epitaph when I when I pass on, I swear.
Yeah, so some things, especially with technology in place, is it really supports employee experience. And one of the really cool bits about working with recognition is that you get to make people's day quite a lot secondhand. So you'll see, you'll get reward through the system potentially, which is even nicer. So you get a recognition, that's great. Sometimes there's an element of reward with it, that's really lovely. And as part of moving from before COVID to after COVID, is a lot of the things like people had manager lunches, or they were able to take a car parking space or something like that, isn't something that's possible or tangible anymore. So maybe that means that now that's in the form of a little bit of a reward added to a recognition or something like that. And one of the things that we really love is when our support team come through and tell us a really cute anecdote of a customer that's come in and they've been surprised with their reward, or they tell us how they're going to use it. And you get into these really interesting conversations with people about how they're going to use it. They were surprised, so they're really happy that they've got it. So I was looking through yesterday and last week, and I found a couple that were really poignant that we spoke to during lockdown. And we had a guy that wasn't expecting to have any reward given to him, but he received some through the platform. He came through asking us for flight information to see if there was anything we could do to help him with buying flights or any flight vouchers and things like that. And we gave him a couple of options, but he told us that he was using the reward to go and see his daughter that he hadn't seen because of COVID restrictions. And he hadn't seen her for a couple of years. And for anybody that knows me, I'm a massive crybaby. So anything like that makes me cry. And it's just so nice to be able to read those sorts of stories. And then something we saw really dramatically change during the pandemic was how people use their reward. So you generally get people using like a virtual card, or an Amazon is always a really popular one. But during the pandemic, we saw the change in voucher options going to supermarket-led ones. So all those big chains of people then moving to get things they actually needed and things that would actually support them during a time where people are uncertain, some people are furloughed, so maybe not getting their normal paycheck and living month to month a little bit harder than they have previously. And we had one lady come through who received one just before Christmas and then was like, I'm going to spend this on a couple of fancy things I wasn't going to get for my Christmas dinner. And she was so elated. It was great. But my favourite one will always be a granddad who came through and told us that he bought like 6 of the same voucher, and he wanted us to help him work out how he was going to share them with his children, his grandchildren, because he hadn't seen them during the pandemic and he wanted to send them a little treat. And I think we gave him advice that he should make them little cards and post them. But it was just really sweet, and just him having that reward meant that he could then share it and have that little bit of happiness like spread amongst his family, which in a really disconnected time was probably really lovely for everybody involved. But yeah, definitely my favorite ones.
That's too sweet. Yeah, and I think it's so important to remember the human element in all of this. And I think that's something that Catherine Kendall talks about, is the human in human relations and human resources. And it also is important to remember that when we're talking about technology, we still are talking about, yes, end users, but we are talking about people. And so when you have the right technology in place and you have something, you know, obviously we enjoy what we've put together. But if, you know, in the stories that you're talking about, Abby, say there being a manager lunch that you could typically have, that probably would have been excellent for a lot of people, but sometimes the rewards that were given from an organization was a little bit one size fits all. Sometimes if it was a physical thing, it would just sit in a drawer, and now the impact, again, to bring it back to emotional resonance, the emotional resonance really wasn't there because it didn't mean something. But when you have the right technology in place and you give people the choice to use their reward how they want it, we then see exactly what you just talked about, these stories of people who are saying, I couldn't do this thing if I wasn't given that reward. But because of the technology and because of the reward, I can now choose to do this thing that is going to be so meaningful to me and to my loved ones. And I love stories like this, and I know that we're really good at sharing them internally, especially when there are people who come through support, just because it keeps us focused on the right thing. And I think anyone who is on this webinar today, I would bet everything I have that you have the exact same intentions of truly having happier employees and having technology that enables things to be really meaningful for them. And therefore closing some of those gaps, you know, that we talked about at the beginning. So I guess some final thoughts. For me, at least, I think it is just so important to remember that as long as recognitions are genuine, there should be no limit. This should be, obviously reward is going to be a different story because we all have our budget constraints, but the system itself should help everyone in an organization give as many recognitions as they want to give, because again, as long as they are genuine, they are all going to be meaningful. There isn't really a threshold of, oh, you know what, I've been given too much positive recognition this month. That is never, ever, ever something that we are going to see. The other thing that I would say is that it is so important when trying to bridge this gap between expectations of employees and where companies are at right now, is that you have to have a really clear goal in mind. It can't just be, oh, let's just do it, right? It's got to be done with intention, and it has to be done with integrity. Abby, what would you like to leave everyone with before we jump into questions?
A really bad Star Wars joke. What do you call two Han Solos singing together? A Han's duet. That's a lot.
Perfect. Excellent Star Wars joke. I love it. I think we do have some questions. Excuse me, because I think you will see these for a moment until I pull them down so that I can actually have a look. Oh, we've got quite a few. Oh, Ruth, so kind. Ruth, anyone who joined a little bit late, I was talking about how I'm driving in the UK for the first time, even though I've been here for 3.5 years. Someone has said honking happens and keep going, which I will. Judy has asked, will you be sharing a copy of the slides after the call? And I believe that we will be. I will just confirm that with our marketing team, but I'm sure that can be done. That's no problem. Oh, Laura Jo has already answered that. My apologies. Lori has said, oh, same thing. Will the slides be shared? Judy, again, how many organizations contributed to the research and themes being shared today, please? And are these from any specific industry? Thanks. So to be honest, off the top of my head, I actually cannot remember kind of the top bit of the research. Abby, do you have it to hand by any chance?
I can definitely dig that out. If you go through some of the other questions, I'll have a look.
Perfect. And Judy, if we don't have time to actually pull that out for you, the research is something that we are going to be sharing imminently, and you'll have a full report on all of that. So that should be coming your way too. Lori has said, would be nice to see some information about the data presented, who are the 86 to whom and whatnot. And that is, again, I think a fault on our end, just with the timing of when the data is going to be released. We wanted you to all have the reports before coming into this. It just, the way it worked out, it just wasn't possible. So that, again, the report will be sent out. Lori has also asked, managers are the secret sauce. How do you get managers, leaders on board to make them want to do and use this? So I'm not sure, Abby, if you want to take that one. I feel like I could talk forever about this, but certainly I feel like you will have quite a few insights.
Yeah, so this is a really good question, actually. So from a personal sense, what we like to do is when there is a person or a group of people that we specifically want to target, we always think what's in it for them. So if it's a manager and what's in it for me means that my team are going to be more engaged, I'll have less turnover, they'll be more morale boosted, they'll work better, we'll lead webinars and training courses for that sort of thing, to have that real focus on this is why you should do it, this is what you're going to get from doing it, and this is what you're going to see afterwards. so that you're able to give them not only, yes, you should be doing this because that's a great thing for you to do, but actually the why as well. And that's something that we always focus on at every customer that we have at launch and thereafter.
Yeah, it really is the only way to bring people on board, especially when you're gonna have I've heard the term bandied around of culture evangelists, right? The people that are on the bleeding edge and the first people to volunteer for things like this. And so you've got them already on board. It's about how do you get kind of the mid to end, the tail of that bell curve to be bought in. And we know that is absolutely a challenge. And as Abby has said, we have seen a lot of success by being very direct and having targeted trainings. So we also do the same thing for boards, and we'll run sessions with senior leadership teams, board members, what have you, where the only data and the only stuff that we feature in those presentations is how it's going to make life easier for them. Because if you can make that clear, they don't really want to hear anything else. So we kind of have to play to the selfish aspect of it, but we're Abby and I and the rest of the team, we are happy to lean into that, because we know that even if we are leaning into the selfish aspect of why we want these people to use the system, the end result is so positive, it doesn't even matter. As long as we get them on board, we are happy. James has said there are certainly different audiences and reasons. Managers might be to discuss fundamental well-being, inclusion upwards, and helping people excel, and leaders, top performing companies for employee engagement have repeatedly outperformed their competitors. Couldn't agree more. Sarah has asked, is the Benefex platform global? Abby, I see that you have already answered that, but just in case anyone's not in the chat, the answer is it is. So as Abby said, within recognition, we're live in over 60 countries, but Benefex as a whole is also global, completely global. And I believe that is all of the questions that we had for today. To all of you who joined, thank you so much for being here and for hearing Abby and I talk about this stuff. We're super passionate about it, and I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions that you think of after the fact, please feel free to email us and we'll get back to you with all of the data. And again, we will be sharing the slides as well as the report. Clearly the thing that everyone wants to sink their teeth into, and I love that because it means that people love data as much as me. So that will be coming your way shortly. And on that note, I will say thank you very much, and hopefully we will see you soon.
Thank you.